The splintering sound of wood echoed through the mountain cabin at 1:17 a.m. A man in a security uniform burst through the door, flashlight blazing, shouting commands. But 13-year-old Marcus Thompson was already awake, already armed, and already pulling the trigger. What happened next would expose a conspiracy so twisted, it would shake an entire community to its core and leave a family fighting not just for justice, but for their very freedom. The Thompson family thought they had found paradise when they purchased their dream cabin in Pine Ridge Estates, a gated mountain community 2 hours outside Denver. Dr. Sarah Thompson, a pediatric surgeon, and her husband Jake, a former Marine turned carpenter, had saved for years to buy the rustic retreat where they could escape the city's chaos with their son Marcus. But paradise had rules, lots of them. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, led by the iron-fisted Margaret Whitmore, governed the community with military precision. No modifications without approval. No vehicles parked on driveways overnight. No exterior lighting after 10 p.m. The rule book was thick, and enforcement was swift. These people are insane, Jake muttered one evening, waving a citation for having their recycling bin visible from the street. It's like living in a police state. Sarah tried to keep the peace. She attended HOA meetings, smiled politely at Margaret's lengthy speeches about community standards, and paid the mounting fines without complaint. But Jake's frustration grew with each ridiculous violation notice. The breaking point came in October when the HOA demanded they remove a wheelchair ramp Jake had built for his elderly father's visits. The ramp, they claimed, was an unauthorized structural modification that violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. My father served in Vietnam, Jake told the HOA board at a heated meeting. He deserves to visit his grandson without crawling upstairs. Margaret Whitmore's response was ice cold. Community standards apply to everyone, Mr. Thompson. No exceptions. The legal battle began immediately. The Thompsons hired attorney David Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. Chen discovered that Pine Ridge's enforcement was unusually aggressive. The community had filed more legal actions in 5 years than most HOA letters file in decades. Something wasn't right. As winter approached, the harassment escalated. Citations arrived daily for increasingly petty violations. Their mailbox was reportedly 3 inches too far from the curb. Their Christmas lights were excessively bright. Even their 13-year-old son Marcus received a violation for his bicycle being parked inappropriately in their own driveway. They're trying to force us out, Sarah realized one evening, sorting through a stack of fines totaling over $15,000. This is coordinated harassment. Jake had reached his limit. A former military police officer, he began documenting everything, photographing citation officers, recording their interactions, and researching the HOA's financial records. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The Pine Ridge HOA was operating a sophisticated legal mill. Families who couldn't pay mounting fines were forced to sell their properties at below market prices to a shell company called Mountain Acquisitions, LLC. The company would then flip the properties for massive profits. And Margaret Whitmore wasn't just the HOA president. She was Mountain Acquisitions' primary investor. They're stealing people's homes, Jake told Chen during an emergency meeting. This isn't about community standards. It's about money. Chen nodded grimly. We need to be careful. If they're running a conspiracy this large, they won't hesitate to escalate their tactics. His warning proved prophetic. In December, the harassment turned dangerous. Their cabin security system was mysteriously disabled. Strange vehicles appear on their street at odd hours. Marcus reported being followed home from school. Sarah wanted to leave. We can't risk our son's safety over this. But Jake refused to run. If we leave, they win, and the next family gets destroyed. On the night of January 15th, Jake couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. He checked the security cameras he'd installed after the official system was sabotaged. The feeds were dark. Someone had cut the power lines. He woke Sarah and Marcus. Get dressed. Something's happening. At 1:15 a.m., Jake spotted movement outside. Multiple figures in dark clothing were surrounding the cabin. He grabbed his service pistol and handed Marcus his hunting rifle. Dad, what's going on? Marcus whispered, fear evident in his voice. I don't know, son. But stay ready. At 1:17 a.m., the front door exploded inward. A man in a security uniform burst through, flashlight blazing, shouting, HOA enforcement. Everyone on the ground. But the intruder had made a fatal mistake. Marcus, positioned by the stairs with a clear line of sight, didn't hesitate. His father had trained him well. The rifle cracked once, and the fake officer crumpled to the floor. Two more men rushed through the broken door. Jake engaged them in a fierce gunfight while Sarah called 911. When the smoke cleared, one intruder was dead, another wounded, and the third had fled into the night. The surviving attacker, bleeding and cornered, gasped out a confession that would change everything. Whitmore, she paid us, said make it look like a break-in, as sirens wailed in the distance. The Thompson family realized their nightmare was just beginning, because when the police arrived, they weren't there to arrest the intruders. They were there to arrest Jake and Marcus Thompson for murder. The Jefferson County jail felt like a concrete tomb as Jake Thompson sat in his cell, staring at gray walls and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. 3 days had passed since the shooting, and the charges were devastating. First degree murder for Jake, manslaughter for 13-year-old Marcus, and conspiracy for Sarah. This is insane, Sarah said during their first meeting with attorney David Chen. Her hand shook as she spoke. They broke into our home. They were armed. How are we the criminals? Chen's expression was grim, because Margaret Whitmore got to the district attorney first. She's claiming the men were legitimate HOA security conducting a lawful property inspection. She says you ambushed them at 1 a.m., breaking down our door. Jake's voice cracked with disbelief. The surviving attacker, Tony Vasquez, changed his story. He now claims you lured them into a trap. Says you were running an armed compound in violation of HOA regulations. The case against the Thompsons seemed airtight. Prosecutor Elizabeth Hartley, known for her tough stance on vigilante justice, painted them as domestic terrorists who had declared war on their community. The media ate it up. Headlines screamed about HOA vigilantes and mountain cabin massacre. But Chen wasn't giving up. He hired private investigator Maria Santos, a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime. If the Thompsons were telling the truth about a conspiracy, there would be evidence. Santos started with the dead intruder, Michael Kane. Despite being introduced as HOA security, Kane had no legitimate security license. His background revealed connections to a Denver-based company called Titan Protection Services, a firm with a reputation for intimidation and harassment. This guy wasn't security. Santos reported to Chen. He was muzzle for hire. The breakthrough came when Santos tracked down Kane's phone records. In the weeks before the shooting, he'd received multiple calls from a burner phone registered to Margaret Whitmore's assistant, Carol Jensen. Meanwhile, Jake used his time in jail productively. As a former MP, he understood how to work the system. He befriended other inmates, many of whom had stories about Pine Ridge HOA. The pattern was always the same: escalating violations, mounting fines, and families forced to sell at rock-bottom prices. "They got my cousin too," said cellmate Robert Martinez. "Same deal. Citations for everything." Then suddenly they're breaking into his house claiming he was running a meth lab. He lost everything. Sarah, out on bail but under house arrest, began her own investigation. She discovered that Mountain Acquisitions LLC had purchased 17 properties in Pine Ridge over the past 3 years, all from families who'd been forced out by HOA violations. The company's registered address led to a luxury Denver office building where Margaret Whitmore maintained a private suite. The emotional toll was devastating. Marcus, released to his mother's custody, struggled with nightmares and panic attacks. The boy who'd saved his family was now branded a killer by his community. Former friends at school avoided him. Teachers whispered in hallways, "I just want this to be over," Marcus told his mother one evening, tears streaming down his face. "Maybe we should have just left." Sarah held her son tight, feeling the weight of their fight crushing down on them. "Your father's right, sweetheart. If we don't fight this, they'll do it to another family." The stakes rose dramatically when Chen received a threatening phone call. A distorted voice warned him to drop the case or join your clients in a cell. The next morning, his office was burglarized. Only case files related to the Thompson defense were taken. "They're getting desperate," Chen told Sarah. "That means we're on the right track." Santos had been tracking financial records, following the money trail from Mountain Acquisitions back to its investors. What she found was staggering. The company wasn't just buying foreclosed properties, it was receiving development loans from First National Bank of Denver, where Margaret Whitmore's husband sat on the board of directors. "This goes deeper than home theft," Santos explained. "They are planning to redevelop the entire Pine Ridge area. Every family they force out brings them closer to controlling enough property for a major resort development." The evidence was mounting, but they needed proof of direct conspiracy. That proof came from an unexpected source: Carol Jensen, Whitmore's assistant, who'd been having a crisis of conscience since the shooting. Late one night, Jensen called Chen's emergency line. "I have recordings," she whispered. "Margaret made me record all her calls for legal protection. But some of them, they're about the Thompson family, about the break-in." The meeting was arranged in secret. Jensen, terrified and shaking, handed over a flash drive containing months of recorded conversations. Chen plugged it into his laptop, and what they heard made them all gasp. Margaret Whitmore's voice was crystal clear. "I don't care what it takes. Carol, the Thompsons need to be gone by New Year's. If legal pressure isn't working, we'll have to try other methods." Another recording from January 14th, one day before the shooting, was even more damning. "Tell Kane and his team to make it look like a break-in gone wrong. If the family resists, well, accidents happen." But the most shocking revelation came in a conversation between Whitmore and prosecutor Elizabeth Hartley. "Don't worry about the evidence, Beth. Just make sure the charges stick. When this is over, your husband's construction company gets the Pine Ridge development contract." Chen stared at the laptop screen, his hands trembling. We've got them all." As the truth emerged, the Thompson family prepared for the fight of their lives, because proving conspiracy was one thing, surviving it was another, and Margaret Whitmore still had powerful allies who would do anything to keep their crimes buried. The courtroom battle was about to begin, and the Thompsons were walking into a war where the enemy controlled the weapons, the battlefield, and the judge. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom buzzed with tension as the Thompson family murder trial began. Outside, Protesters carried signs reading "Justice for Pine Ridge" and "Stop HOA Terrorism." Inside, prosecutor Elizabeth Hartley adjusted her notes, confident in what seemed like an open and shut case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hartley began, her voice commanding the room. "Jake Thompson is a former military police officer trained to kill. His 13-year-old son Marcus had been taught to use weapons with deadly precision. On the night of January 15th, they used the training to ambush and murder two innocent security officers who were simply doing their jobs." She painted the picture methodically, the Thompsons as anti-government extremists who declared war on their community. The broken door was defensive action by security officers responding to reports of illegal weapons stockpiling. The shootings were premeditated murder. Defense attorney David Chen rose slowly, his expression calm, but his eyes blazing. "Members of the jury, what you're about to hear will shock you. This case isn't about murder. It's about a family who discovered a criminal conspiracy so vast, so profitable, that powerful people were willing to kill to protect it." The prosecution's case seemed airtight. Tony Vasquez, the surviving attacker, took the stand with his arm still in a sling. His testimony was damning. The Thompsons had lured security officers into a trap, opening fire without warning. "We announced ourselves clearly," Vasquez testified. "We identified as HOA security conducting a lawful inspection." Mr. Thompson immediately started shooting. Under cross-examination, Chen began chipping away at the story. "Mr. Vasquez, you claim this was a lawful inspection. What time did it occur?" "Around 1 a.m., and lawful inspections typically happen after midnight. Sometimes emergency situations require immediate response." "What was the emergency?" Vasquez hesitated. "Reports of suspicious activity." "What kind of suspicious activity requires breaking down a door at 1 a.m.? Objection. Hartley interjected, argumentative, sustained. But Chen had planted the seed of doubt. He continued methodically, exposing holes in Vasquez's story. The security officers carried no identification. They cut power lines before approaching the cabin. They never attempted to contact the Thompsons by phone or knock on the door. The prosecution's star witness, Margaret Whitmore, took the stand on day 3. Impeccably dressed and radiating authority, she presented herself as a devoted community leader trying to maintain order in a peaceful neighborhood. The Thompsons were consistently hostile to community standards. She testified, "Mr. Thompson made numerous threats at HOA meetings. He called our board members criminals and claimed we were stealing from residents." "Did these threats concern you?" Hartley asked. "Absolutely. When someone with military training makes threats against community leaders, we have to take precautions." Chen's cross-examination was surgical. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you familiar with Mountain Acquisitions, LLC? I believe it's a local real estate company. Are you an investor in Mountain Acquisitions?" Whitmore's composure cracked slightly. "I may have some minor investments." "Minor investments? According to financial records, you're the primary investor with a 60% stake." "Objection. Relevance, Your Honor. This goes to motive for the alleged conspiracy. I'll allow it." Chen continued. "His assault. How many Pine Ridge properties has Mountain Acquisitions purchased in the past 3 years?" "I don't have exact numbers. 17 properties. All from families facing excessive HOA fines. Isn't that correct?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison called for order. But Chen's most devastating moment came when he introduced the recorded conversations. Despite Hartley's objections, Judge Morrison ruled them admissible after Chen demonstrated their authenticity through digital forensics. The jury listened in stunned silence as Margaret Whitmore's voice filled the courtroom. Tell Kane and his team to make it look like a break-in gone wrong. If the family resists, well, accidents happen. Whitmore's face went white. That recording is fake. It's been manipulated. Chen played another recording. This one between Whitmore and prosecutor Hartley herself. Don't worry about the evidence, Beth. Just make sure the charges stick. When this is over, your husband's construction company gets the Pine Ridge development contract. The courtroom exploded. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in the court. Prosecutor. Hartley sat frozen, her face ashen. The ethical implications were staggering. She would face disciplinary action, possibly criminal charges. But Whitmore wasn't finished. In a desperate move, she claimed the recordings were taken out of context. We were discussing legitimate security concerns. The Thompsons were dangerous. Chen introduced his final piece of evidence. Financial records showing payments from Mountain Acquisitions to Titan Protection Services. $50,000 paid to days before the shooting. Mrs. Whitmore, can you explain why your company paid $50,000 to a private security firm to days before the alleged break-in? That was for general security consulting. General consulting that resulted into armed men breaking into a family's home at 1 a.m. The prosecution's case was crumbling. But Whitmore had one last card to play. During a recess, she approached Chen with a settlement offer. Drop the conspiracy charges, and I'll ensure the murder charges are reduced to manslaughter. Your clients serve minimal time. Chen's response was swift. We'll see you in court. On the final day of testimony, 13-year-old Marcus took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as the boy, looking small and vulnerable in the witness chair, recounted the night that changed his life. I was scared, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The men had guns. Dad told me to protect Mom, so I did. Did you want to hurt anyone? Chen asked gently. No, sir. I just wanted them to stop. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. Hartley, despite her compromised position, attacked Marcus relentlessly. You've been trained to use weapons since you were very young, haven't you? Yes, ma'am. Dad taught me gun safety, and you knew exactly where to aim to kill someone, didn't you? Objection. Chen shouted. Your Honor, the witness is 13 years old, but the damage was visible on some jurors' faces. Despite the conspiracy evidence, they were struggling with the image of a child trained to kill. As closing arguments approached, both sides prepared for a final battle. The evidence of conspiracy was overwhelming, but would it be enough to overcome the emotional impact of a child shooter? Chen knew his closing argument would determine whether the Thompson family walked free or spent decades in prison. And outside the courtroom, Margaret Whitmore was making desperate phone calls, trying to arrange one final, deadly solution to her problems. The verdict was just hours away, but the real battle was about to begin. The Jefferson County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. Media trucks lined the streets. Protesters chanted from both sides, and inside, the packed courtroom waited with held breath as Judge Patricia Morrison prepared to read the jury's verdict. Jake Thompson sat between his wife and son, their hands clasped together in a show of unity that had sustained them through months of hell. Defense attorney David Chen reviewed his notes one final time, while across the aisle, prosecutor Elizabeth Hartley, now facing her own criminal investigation, stared blankly ahead. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Morrison asked. The jury foreman, a retired teacher named Robert Liu, stood slowly. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of first-degree murder against Jake Thompson. How do you find not guilty? The courtroom erupted. Sarah Thompson collapsed in tears while Marcus buried his face in his father's shoulder. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of months lift from his chest. On the charge of manslaughter against Marcus Thompson, how do you find not guilty? The celebration was deafening. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel repeatedly, but even she seemed moved by the moment. The Thompson family had been vindicated, but Chen knew the story wasn't over. As the courtroom began to clear, he noticed Margaret Whitmore slip out through a side exit. His private investigator, Maria Santos, was waiting for his signal. Follow her, Chen texted Santos. This isn't finished. The immediate aftermath of the verdict was chaotic. Media surrounded the Thompson family as they left the courthouse. Jake, overwhelmed with emotion, could barely speak. We just want to go home, he managed to say. We want to rebuild our lives and help other families who've been victims of this conspiracy. But Margaret Whitmore had other plans. Santos tracked her to a private airport outside Denver, where a chartered jet was waiting. As Whitmore approached the plane, Santos realized she was about to lose the mastermind of the entire conspiracy. Santos called Chen immediately. She's running, private jet. Probably heading out of the country. Chen made a split-second decision. He called FBI agent Patricia Walsh, who'd been monitoring the case for potential federal crimes. Pat, we need to stop Margaret Whitmore from leaving the country. She's at Jefferson County Airport right now. Within minutes, federal agents surrounded the aircraft. Whitmore, halfway up the jet stairs, turned to see her escape route blocked. Her face showed a mixture of rage and desperation. Margaret Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and solicitation of murder, Agent Walsh announced. But Whitmore had one final revelation that would shock everyone. As agents placed her in handcuffs, she looked directly at the news cameras that had followed the commotion. You think this was just about Pine Ridge? She laughed bitterly. This operation spans 12 states, hundreds of HOA letters, thousands of families. I'm just middle management. Chen felt his blood run cold. The conspiracy was far larger than they'd imagined. Over the following weeks, Whitmore's arrest led to a cascade of revelations. Federal investigators discovered that the whole scheme was part of a massive real estate manipulation network called Community Standards Initiative. The operation had stolen over $200 million in property values from families across the country. The real mastermind was revealed to be billionaire developer Harrison Cross, who'd been using HOA letters as weapons to acquire land for luxury developments. Whitmore, prosecutor Hartley, and dozens of other officials were merely cogs in his machine. Cross had perfected the formula: install loyalists in HOA leadership positions, harass families with frivolous violations, force them into financial distress, then purchase their properties through shell companies at below market prices. The stolen land was then developed into high-end resorts and commercial properties. The Thompson case became the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. Marcus, the 13-year-old boy who'd been branded a killer, became the face of resistance against predatory HOA letters. His courage in that terrifying moment had exposed crimes that would have continued destroying families for years. 6 months after the verdict, the Thompson family returned to their Pine Ridge cabin. The HOA had been dissolved. Margaret Whitmore was serving 25 years in federal prison, and Harrison Cross was fighting extradition from Switzerland. Jake stood on his rebuilt front porch, watching Marcus play in the yard. The wheelchair ramp for his father remained in place. No one would ever again tell him it violated community standards. Dad, Marcus called out. Santos is on TV again. private investigator Maria Santos had become a celebrity, appearing on news shows to discuss HOA fraud. Her investigation of the Community Standards Initiative had led to criminal charges in 12 states and civil lawsuits worth over $500 million. Sarah joined her husband on the porch, carrying a stack of letters from families across the country who'd been victimized by similar schemes. "We're getting calls from reporters wanting to interview Marcus again." Jake shook his head. "The boy's been through enough. Let the adults handle the interviews." But Marcus had other ideas. Now 14 and more confident than ever, he'd become an advocate for horror reform. He testified before state legislatures, appeared at town halls, and used social media to educate families about their rights. "I want to help," Marcus insisted. When his parents tried to shield him from the spotlight, "What happened to us is happening to other kids. They need to know they can fight back." The final twist came exactly 1 year after the shooting. David Chen received a call from FBI agent Walsh with stunning news. Harrison Cross had been arrested in Geneva, and during his extradition hearing, he'd made a desperate plea bargain. Cross revealed that the Community Standards Initiative was itself part of an even larger operation involving offshore money laundering, foreign real estate investments, and political corruption reaching into Congress. The Thompson family's fight had uncovered what federal investigators now called the largest domestic theft conspiracy in American history. As Chen hung up the phone, he looked out his office window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in those buildings, other conspiracies were probably unfolding. Other families were being targeted. Other children might one day have to make the terrible choice that Marcus Thompson had made. But thanks to a 13-year-old boy's courage and a family's refusal to surrender, the hunters had become the hunted. The Thompson case had proven that sometimes, when all the systems fail, ordinary people can still fight back and win. Jake Thompson summed it up perfectly during his final interview. "They thought they could terrorize us into submission. They thought a family fighting alone couldn't defeat their money and power. They were wrong. Sometimes the little guy wins. Sometimes justice actually works. And sometimes, when everything looks hopeless, a child's courage can change the world." The Thompson family's ordeal was over, but their impact would last forever. Across the country, families facing HOA harassment now have hope, legal precedent, and proof that the powerful could be held accountable. And in Pine Ridge, where it all began, a small plaque now hangs by the Thompson family's front door, home of the free, because of the brave. If you enjoyed this incredible true story of justice and courage, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone who believes that ordinary families can defeat extraordinary corruption. Your support helps us bring more untold stories of justice to light. What would you have done in the Thompson family's situation? Let us know in the comments below.